All right, so let's get started with our seventh part to our notes for chapter 24. So now we're looking at the expansion of the United States, right, which we really haven't talked about the United States a lot. We know that, of course, they underwent the American Revolution, they underwent the Industrial Revolution, and then we mentioned how they became an imperial power. So let's go back to kind of like that midway point, throughout the 1800s. And of course, we need to remember the United States starts on the East Coast, on the Atlantic coast of North America. And over the decades of the 1800s, it's going to spread westward. It's going to expand westward over time. So here we see that the United States is going to follow this cultural idea of manifest destiny, that the United States, that the North American continent belonged to the Americans, and that it was a sense of nationalism and pride, right, creating this coast to coast civilization from the east to the west. So and part of that mentality was that the Americans, that the natives, the white Americans were more productive than the natives because they would put more land to agricultural use than the natives, many of which still maintained sometimes or hunting and gathering lifestyle. So manifest destiny is a cultural justification of that westward expansion, or again, the belief that it is the destiny of the United States to spread from one side to the other. And just like we saw how the native people of Africa or of India or of Australia resisted to the expansion of European and Western powers into their lands, the Native American Indians are also going to resist. They're also going to, sometimes they're going to unite and form alliances to fight against the expansion of the Americans. And it's going to be to limited success, this resistance, for the most part, because they, one, were technologically at a disadvantage, and two, a lot of them suffer from diseases, right? Diseases that are a continuation of that Columbian exchange. And three was that the tribes themselves were not necessarily always united. Therefore, it's easy to kind of like divide and conquer one tribe at a time. And again, the superior firepower of the United States, especially in the late 1800s, is going to be a main reason why the Indians are unable to kind of like stop the westward expansion. There's going to be lots of cases of like massacres of American soldiers killing, innocent or women and children and stuff like that. We also see the westward expansion comes at a cost to other states or other empires, maybe, or in this case, Mexico. Remember, most of the western part of the United States, the southwestern part, belonged to Mexico or was part of the Spanish territory that eventually became Mexico. And the United States went to war against Mexico in the U.S.-Mexican War, or Mexican-American War, and the United States gained those territories during this movement of westward expansion. This westward expansion also leads to increased use of slavery in the southern and some of the western states. And slavery becomes even more important because they would produce cheap raw cotton, right? And these cheap raw cotton is, of course, going to fuel or is going to supply the industries, the cotton textile industries, in the more industrial parts of the United States, which is the northeastern part. So keep in mind that the wealth of the United States, whether it's the agricultural or the industrial parts, benefited both greatly from slave labor. And of course, increases in use of slavery and amongst other issues led to the United States Civil War, which was very destructive. South loses, slavery does come to an end in 1865, and we see a more unified or more, we see that the first kind of inklings of a national identity, where Americans stop seeing themselves as, from individual states, like, the Texans or the Virginians or the Pennsylvanians or the New Yorkers, and they start seeing themselves as Americans. which will be important because once they're united under that national identity as Americans, then it's easy to start kind of spreading beyond America and start colonizing and conquering other parts of the world. All right, North American economy. Let's quickly talk about the economy of the United States. Remember, the United States economy grew throughout the 1800s, mainly from the arrival of immigrants who helped expand the industries, the factory workers in the Northeast, the railroad workers in the out west, in the western parts of the country, and of course, agricultural economy all over the United States. And so we see like Italians come in, we see Polish, Jews, Germans, all Irish, right, all types of nationalities from all parts of Europe make their way to the United States to work here. We also see that there's going to be a lot of migrants that move to Latin America, and they're going to be working in agriculture mainly. And so we see a lot of like Italians move to Argentina. We see a lot of course, Spanish people moving to the Caribbean, places like Cuba and Puerto Rico. We see a lot of Asians, Chinese and Japanese. They move to like places like Brazil or Cuba as well, and they're going to be working in agriculture. Now, when it comes to the United States, Britain kind of at the very start of the 1800s, Britain kind of helps the United States, actually. There's going to be a lot of investment in the expansion of the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to see the United States and Canada both industrialized roughly around the same time, mid-1800s. And then once the United States kind of like industrializes and it's up and running, they're going to, continue expanding, continue growing. They're going to undergo the second Industrial Revolution, where we see a lot of more like electricity, and we see the beginnings of automobiles and stuff like that. And they're going to construct, of course, that railroad that connects, the east to the west, and the Trans-Pacific Railroad. And here we see some of these products these consumer products that were created as a result of the second Industrial Revolution. So photography, light bulbs, telephones, phonographs, that sort of stuff. And we were talking about the railroad system again. The United States will have the second largest railroad system in the world. Russia will be the first one. The United States is going to create the time zones, right? Which is one of the side effects of the Industrial Revolution is the creation of time zones, because now you need to be able to manage time more efficiently from one part of the world to the next. For Latin America economy, again, Latin America, we're going to see that there's not going to be that much movement towards industrialization. There's going to be some attempts, but they're going to fail. So we saw like in places like China and the Ottoman Empire. And actually, strangely enough, it's kind of for the same reasons. Actually, not for the same reasons, but it's the same type of people that were responsible, meaning upper class people. And the upper class people who of course, could benefit from industrialization, many times when these Latin American countries, let's say, for example, Colombia. If Colombia received a grant, received a loan to industrialize so that they can build railroads or telegraph lines or whatever, a factory, more likely than not, the people who received these funds, right, this loan that was borrowed from like Britain or America, more likely the government's just going to keep it, right? They're going to pocket the money and not pay back the loan and not industrialize. So there's going to be a lot of government corruption. And of course, the government being run by Creoles, right? The Creoles are the dominant political and economic elites of Latin America. So some countries like Mexico are going to have some successes in industrialization, but the rest of Latin America will not, at least not during the 1800s. We won't see it more until the 20th century. And again, it's government corruption who is at fault. And government, of course, run by the Creoles. So because early investments, were failures because of corruption, we see that Britain and the United States are not going to want to invest as much as they could have. And therefore, we're not going to see that industrialization process kick off in Latin America in the 1800s. Instead, Latin America will become an export economy. They're going to be exporting raw materials, food supplies to North America, to Europe. So, for example, we see a lot of sugar and tobacco coming out of Cuba. We see beef coming out of Argentina, copper out of Mexico. And because they become exporting economies, they're going to become dependent on the West, dependent on North America and Europe, and kind of rely on that. So whoever owns the land, whoever owns the sugar plantations, the tobacco plantations, the copper mines, who are of course going to be the Creoles, they're going to benefit economically, but they're not going to like reinvest that money into industrial revolution stuff where more and more people can benefit. You could have a growing middle class. So in Latin America, we can see that, we're not going to see a middle class grow. The upper class is going to own all the money or own all the resources, and the lower class, the vast majority of the people, are going to own pretty much nothing. All right, so we're going to stop here for this part, and we'll see you next time for the 8th and final part of this video lecture. Thank you for watching.